guys, you're welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Eugene, and in this video we're going to have a look at how we can migrate an on-premise file server to Microsoft Azure using Azure File Sync. Now, what is Azure File Sync? Now, Azure File Sync is an agent that is installed on the server side of an on-premise file server that enables you to synchronize your file server's content to Microsoft Azure. So what are the prerequisites? You need to make sure you have an Azure subscription, and then you have to also have the right privileges to perform this task. So basically you need an Azure RBAC contributor role, and then you also need at least an Azure AD application admin or user admin role, and then you also have to have Microsoft Windows Server operating system minimum running Windows Server 2012 R2 or higher. Okay, so you have to also ensure that the Windows Server operating system that you're using is fully licensed, so that you do not have any limitations when you are setting up this Azure File Sync deployment. Okay, so let's get straight into the demonstrations. I'm going to take you to the Azure portal. Okay, so the first thing that you need to do is that you need to make sure you have an Azure subscription. So if you do have an Azure subscription for your company or your business, you can go to portal.azure.com and sign in with your Azure account. Now, when you get into the Azure portal, what you want to create is a storage account. Okay, so a storage account is like a logical unit that is used to organize various storage types on Microsoft Azure. But before I do that, let me take you to my virtual platform that I'm using. Okay, so I have a file server over here that I've set up on VMware workstation. Okay, you're going to use virtualization today. This is going to mimic on-premise file server environment. I'm going to test connection to this file server just to make sure the file shares over here are accessible on my local network. So I'm going to go to a Windows 10 client operating system that is on my virtual network, and I'm going to test connection to this file server. I already put in the UNC path over here. It's file server 1. That is the name of my file server. So I'm going to test connection to it. When I go OK, it displays all the shares that I have on my file server here for me. So everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and map one of these drives. Okay, I'm going to map one of these network drives and go finish here. Okay, and test pushing content to it. Already there is a content in here, so I'm going to just create one more content. Okay, so I'm just going to create this one and call it Windows 10 text file, and I'm going to open it up and just type something simple inside, like Ghana is the best. Okay, so I'm going to save, and then just make sure my file server is working very well on premise. So I'm going to just open this directory over here that contains my file server's shares, and just make sure everything is working fine locally. So as you can see, everything is being synchronized locally. But the problem that we want to solve is to migrate this file server to Microsoft Azure using Azure File Sync. So let's get to it. So I'm going to go back to my Azure portal, and then the first thing that you need to create over here is a storage account. No matter what type of storage you want to create on Azure, you have to have a storage account. So before you also create a resource on Azure, you need to have a resource group. So let's go ahead and create a resource group over here. I'm going to create a special resource group for this task. Okay, so I'm going to create a new resource group by going to my resource group blade and then clicking on create a resource group. Okay, and then I'm going to call this resource group storage RG, and I'm going to keep it in the East US region, so everything is cool. I don't want to use tags, so I'm going to click review and create straight away and go create over here. Once my resource group is created, I'm going to go ahead and go to the storage account blade in my portal menu, and then go create a storage account. Okay, this is going to open up a short kind of wizard for me, asking me to select the subscription I want to tie this resource to. So I'm going to use my MSDN platform subscription, which is the only subscription I have on this Azure account. And then I'm going to select the resource group that I created specifically for this task, which is the storage RG. And then it asks me to specify a storage account name. the storage account name, I think, according to Microsoft, only accepts lowercase letters. So I'm going to call this one storage 1. Okay, yeah, I'm going to get an error. So let me just go lowercase and just say storage 1, storage 01. Okay, and then I'm going to keep it in the East US region, and it's asking me for performance options over here. I'm going to leave it at the standard performance option here. It says storage 01, it's already taken. Okay, it has to be unique, so I'm going to call this one, I'm going to put U in here in front of this one, U storage 1, and I think everything is fine. Should be okay now. And then the performance options, I'm going to select standard. Standard is just okay for what we want to do, and it also gives us the option over here to specify the redundancy options. Microsoft has a lot of redundancy options. We have geo redundant, zone redundant, and local redundant storage, and then we also have geo zone redundant storage. These are all fault tolerance mechanisms that Microsoft has placed on their storage account to ensure that in case there's a disaster, you can still have access to your data. I have used LRS for a very long time for all my storage accounts, and I've not really had any problem where I wake up one day and my files are inaccessible. No, there's no problem. So this is just fine. Okay, so I'm going to go next here. And then there are some security options that are provided over here. You don't need to be bothered about this. You can just skip past it. But the most important thing that I want to point out here is the access tier. Okay, the access tier specifies the kind of, I think, bandwidth that is going to be allocated to you. So it determines how fast your data will be transferred to Azure and how fast it can be read on-premise. Okay, and with the cool tier, it is designed for infrequent access data. Okay, so if you have some file server that's keeping stuff like backups or files that are not frequently accessed by users, or it doesn't really change frequently, you can use the cool tier. Okay, but if you have probably a file server that you're about to migrate to the cloud and has files that is highly accessed by multiple users day in and day out, you have to use a hot tier. Okay, so I'm going to use a hot tier for now, and then go next here, and it gives me options to specify network connectivity options. Okay, and we have public access to all networks, and then we have disable public access and use private access. If you're going to use this storage account only within Microsoft Azure's resources, okay, like for instance, you're going to access this storage account between virtual machines on Azure only, you have to use private access to protect your data from the public network. Okay, but in our scenario, if you look at the diagram that I just showed you over here, we're going to be accessing our Azure storage account and Azure files from the public network. You have to go through the public network, so we have to make sure we open the access on the public network. So we're going to leave it at the default, and then we're going to make sure these defaults are also maintained. We go next to data protection, and Microsoft gives us the option to put some mechanisms in place to ensure that, should in case the storage on our storage accounts is cleaned up, it's going to be kept for a while before it is totally removed. But we don't need it for this demo, so I'm going to clear all of them and go next to encryption. Okay, there are two encryption options: Microsoft Managed Keys and Custom Managed Keys. We're going to leave it at Microsoft Managed Keys, and it gives us the option to enable support for customer managed keys options over here. Okay, we are not going to use this storage account to create tables and queues. We're going to just use it to create blobs and files shares. So we're going to leave it at the default over here. We are not going to enable infrastructure encryption because it's just for demonstration purposes. But if you're doing this in a production environment, you want to put much more encryption and security in place to ensure that your data is well protected. Okay, so I'm going to go next to tags. I'm not going to use tags, so I'm going to go next again, and then it's going to validate all the input that I provided. And if everything is okay, it's going to give me a pass. So everything seems to be okay. I'm going to go ahead and create my storage account. Now, the storage account that we've created is not what is going to host our files. That's one thing that you have to keep in your head when you are dealing with storage on Azure. Okay, this is just a logical container that is used to manage the various storage. Okay, if you bring it to file management option, probably will say it's a folder. Okay, but it's not a folder. We don't call it a folder. Okay, so when you create a storage account on Azure, you don't expect that you're going to have an upload button right away to start pushing your files to the cloud. Okay, it is just the logical unit that is used to organize the various storage. So we are now about to create one of the storage types that we have on Azure. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click on go to resource over here called uStorage1, and then create one of the types of storages that Microsoft Azure supports. So we're going to create an Azure file shares storage on the storage account. We don't need this. We don't need that on that. This is what we need. So I'm going to go to file shares and then click on add file share over here. Okay, it's going to give us the option to specify a name. I'm going to call this one Azure file share 01. Okay, and then leave the access tier at the default. You can also switch it to hot if you want. Okay, let's put it on hot here. And by default, it sets the maximum capacity of our Azure file shares storage to 5 terabytes. Okay, we're not going to need 5 terabytes. Okay, so I'm going to click create here. But after creating, it gives you the option to modify the quota. We are not going to let Microsoft dedicate 5 terabytes to us just because of this demo. So I'm going to go edit the quota and then reduce it down to about 20 GB. Okay, we don't need that much. So this is how you change the quota on Azure file shares. Okay, if in case you think the capacity is too much for you. Okay, so 20 GB, we have Azure file shares over here. Now, how do we start pushing content to these file shares? Okay, you can use the upload over here. Okay, or you can just go here. Okay, you can just right click on it and go to connect over here. Now when you click connect, it gives you a PowerShell script that you can just copy. Okay, then bring it to your file server. Okay, this is one way, but this is not what we want to achieve. I just want to show you that there is an option that you can use to connect your file shares without going through so much hassle. So this is the first step. Okay, so I'm going to go to my on-premise file server, open up my PowerShell, and then do a paste. Okay, so when I paste it for the first time, it's going to test connection to Azure. Let's see what happens. Okay, test connection, and then I'm going to right click again to paste the rest of the code, and it gives me this error over here, which is very normal. Okay, because look here. Okay, so when I right click on my Azure file shares and go to connect again, you will see that it's trying to use drive letter Z, which I have already used to mount a network drive locally. So that's what's giving us the error. In case you face the same problem, just change it here and it changes the drive letter. You can copy the PowerShell script again. And then I'm going to try pasting again. Okay, let me close PowerShell. I'm going to reopen PowerShell again. Paste the first script by right clicking. As soon as you right click on PowerShell, you paste the code on a clipboard. So it's going to test connection again. And then when I right click for the second time, it's going to connect to Azure and then mount my 20 GB Azure file storage for me. Everything looks good. No more errors. It's right here. Okay, so I can start pushing files in here manually, but it is not the ideal way of migrating your file server to the cloud. Okay, we can test and see if this Azure file shares works. So this is one way you can have access to Azure files. There are other ways. Okay, so I'm going to just paste a file over here. Okay, let me call this one Windows 11. I don't want any conflicts later on. Okay, let's see. It changes. And then let's go to Azure file shares. on our Azure portal and double check. Our file is here, okay? But this is not an ideal way, as I said, of migrating your files to Azure, okay? What is going to happen is that if you want to use this approach, you have to do it manually and it's going to take forever. Okay, so if you want to speed up the process, that is when Azure File Sync comes into picture. Okay, so this is what you need to do. You need to install Azure File Sync on one of your file servers on premise and then configure it to sync the content on it to your Azure files on Microsoft Azure. Okay, so let's have a look at how we can do that. Now, before I even download Azure File Sync and install on my on-premise file server, there's a lot that you need to do here on Azure. Okay, so first of all, when you look at the prerequisite that I mentioned over here, you need to have an Azure RBAC contributor role on the subscription that you are using on Azure, and you have to at least be a user admin, an Azure AD, and at least you have to have an Azure AD user admin role or Azure AD application admin role. Okay, so let's see how we can do that. So I'm going to go to Azure Active Directory on my Azure portal, and if this is a production Azure environment, you're going to have a lot of user accounts over here. I recommend you don't touch the existing users. You can just create a new user for this task. Okay, so let's create a new user by clicking on new user here and then call this user Vida. Okay, and then I'm going to give it the name of Vida and then set a password over here. Now the password has to be a complex password, minimum 12 characters, I think. And then I'm going to leave the default over here and just click create. So it creates this user account, and what I need to do is to assign this user account an application admin Azure AD role or user admin Azure AD role. So I'm going to click on this user account and go to assign roles, click on add assignment, and then go for application administrator. Okay, I'm going to click add here, and then it makes this user an application administrator. I'm going to do a couple of refresh. Okay, I'm going to step back. The Azure portal sometimes can give you trouble. Okay, so I go back, click on assign roles, and then it gives me the application administrator over here. It tells us Vida is an application administrator. Okay, so when you're done with this, you need to also make sure this user is having an RBAC role of contributor. So if everything goes right, you need to make sure when you click here on Azure role assignments, this user is supposed to have a contributor role on this Azure subscription before you can use it to do this. Okay, so how do we do that? You need to go to subscription. So you can search for subscription over here within the Azure portal. You can use this one over here to search for subscription. And then when you go to subscriptions, you make sure you select your preferred subscription. The same subscription that we used to create the storage account. And then you go to access control on this subscription, and then you add an RBAC role for this user. You can click here to add, you can click here to add, you can come over here to add. So I'm going to click here, add role assignment, and then check or select contributor. Now when I click on contributor, I'm going to go next here. It takes me to members, and I'm going to select Vida to be a member of the Azure RBAC contributor role. Okay, so I'm going to select Vida and then go next here and then go review and assign. So once these two roles are assigned, the next thing that we need to do is to look for something that we call Azure Storage Sync Service. Okay, so you can search for Azure Storage Sync Service over here, or you can just go to all services over here and then look for the storage option. When you go to the storage option under all services, you look for Storage Sync Service, okay, which is right here. You need to create a storage sync service if you want to automatically synchronize your on-premise file server to the Azure file storage that you have created here. Okay, so I'm going to go create over here to create a storage sync service. And when I click on create, it's going to ask me on the subscription I want to tie this Azure Storage Sync Service to, which is my default over here. And then you need to select the resource group that contains your storage account. And then you can give this storage sync service a name. I'm going to call this one Sync Service 01. I'm going to keep it in the East US region. Click on Next over here to networking. I'm going to allow access from all networks, okay, not only private endpoints. Go next here, go next, and then create the storage sync service. Looks like everything is going great here, and it's done. Okay, I'm going to go to the storage sync service resource. So in case you're looking for this resource again, okay, you can go back to all services over here, click on storage sync service, and you should find your sync service that you have created for this storage count here. So I'm going to click on my storage sync service, and it takes me to the same place. Now, the next thing I need to do is that after creating the storage sync service, you need to create a sync group. So I'm going to click on sync group and then give it a name. So I'm going to call this one sync group 01. Okay. And then I'm going to tie it to my MSDN subscription, and I'm going to select a storage account. Now it's going to look up all the storage accounts you have on your Azure subscription. And in my case, I only have one, so I'm going to select the uStorage one, which is the storage account that contains my Azure file shares. And then I'm going to select my Azure file share over here, which is Azure file share 1, and go create a sync group. It's going to create a cloud endpoint for me. That's going to help me do my synchronization from my on-premise file server to Azure. The sync group is created. I'm going to open it up, and it tells me it has created a cloud endpoint, which is my Azure file shares. Okay. Now the next thing that I need to do is to register my on-premise file server. Okay. After registering my on-premise file server, I can come here and add the on-premise server I have registered as a server endpoint. If you don't register your on-premise file server on this sync service, you will not be able to add it over here. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my on-premise file server, and then what I need to do now is to look up Azure File Sync on the internet. Okay, so Microsoft provides us with an Azure File Sync agent that we can install on our file server to enable us register our file servers and start synchronizing our on-premise file servers content to Azure file shares on Azure. Okay, so I'm going to go to Google and search for Azure File Sync download. Okay, we'll just accept, and then search for Azure File Sync download. Okay, it's available on Microsoft official download center. So you need to make sure you're getting this from the right source. Make sure you're getting this from an official Microsoft website. Do not download it from a third-party site. So as you can see, there was an ad over here. I'm going to go for this. This is not an ad. This is an official link to Microsoft's official download center. So I'm going to click here, and then it's going to give me access to download Azure File Sync Agent. I'm going to click download here, and as you can see, it gives us a couple of options for Windows Server 2019, Server 2012, 16, and 2022. So this shows that if you're using Windows Server 2008, you will have to upgrade before you can do this, at least to Windows Server 2012 R2. Okay, so I'm going to check this. No, that is not my operating system. Now the version of my operating system, let me check. I know the version, but there is an option here I want to show you. WinVer, when you use this command over here, it can tell you exactly the operating system version that you're using, even the build number. Okay, so this is Windows Server 2019, so I'm going to go for Windows Server 2019 version of Azure File Sync Agent, and then click on next here. Now when I click on next, the download begins. Okay, so once your Azure File Sync Agent is downloaded, you can just run it. I'm going to go okay. It's no problem. This is from Microsoft, so it's just telling me it may contain virus, whatever. We're going to allow the setup to initialize, and I'm going to go next here, except go next, install. Okay, the installation is pretty straightforward. I'm going to leave the default at use existing proxy settings, but if you have a proxy server, you can provide the details for the proxy server to ensure this agent or this application can reach the internet. Okay, I don't have a proxy server, so I'm going to leave the default over here, go next, install. Okay. Okay, so once the installation is complete, you can click on finish here, and it's going to launch the Azure File Sync and allow you to do your registration. But at this point, you need to make sure you have an account in Azure that is having at least the application administrator role, user admin role, and then an RBAC role of contributor. So it's going to allow you to specify the Azure environment. Okay, as you can see, they have some government Azure environment over here. Ours is the regular Azure cloud platform. So I'm going to leave it at Azure Cloud. Go sign in here, and it's going to pop open these options over here. I think this user interface loads using Internet Explorer, and this is a regular behavior when you're visiting sites on Internet Explorer. It normally pops up and allows you to add them to trusted sites. So we have to keep clicking add to trusted site, and then after a while we'll just pop open this one over here, and it's a regular error, so do not worry. You want to just click yes and close, and then click on sign in again, and at the second time it's going to give you the option to provide your Azure account that you're going to use to connect to the storage account. Okay, and this has to be this one over here. Okay, when I go to Azure AD, you remember the account that I created called Vida. When I go to user account, we have a Vida account over here, and this Vida account must have this. When we check assign rules, at least the user account has to have the application administrator role or user administrator role, and then when I go to Azure role assignments, it has to have the contributor role at least. So everything is okay here. If you check on the user account we have on Azure and it's not having these two things, it's likely your registration is going to fail. So everything is good here. I'm going to use this Vida account. Okay, let me just do a copy. Okay, I'm going to go to the profile of this user account and copy the username. It has to be like this. You cannot use a regular live mail or Outlook mail account on this. It's not going to work. Okay, so I'm going to copy a work account like this. Okay, paste it in here. Go next. And it's going to request that I put the password of this user account. And I think it's the first time it's logging in, so it's going to ask me to provide my current password. And then change it again. So regular policy to change password at first logon. So I'm going to go sign in here. Okay, it's going to ask me to select the account. I'm going to select Vida again. And then, as you can see, my subscription has detected. If you don't give the right privileges, it's likely you're going to sign in, but you're not going to see all this, right? So you make sure you provide the right role, and then everything's going to be okay. As you can see, on my resource group for my storage account has popped up here, storage RG. My subscription is here. And then when I go here, my Azure Storage Sync service will pop in here. I can go ahead and register this file server on my Storage Sync service by clicking this button over here. It's going to take a while, and afterwards, when it's registered successfully, we can get to see it on Azure and continue with the configuration. Okay, it tells us registration successful. You can now use PowerShell or Azure Portal to configure synchronization. So everything is okay. I'm going to go ahead and click close here. It's testing connection to several Azure endpoints. It's okay. Everything passed. Okay, so I'm going to click on close here. And then we're going to go back to Azure. That is the only thing you need to do here. And you're going to do it once. Okay, so once this is done, every time you get content on your Azure file server, if the configuration is complete, it's going to synchronize. Okay, so let's go back to Azure. I'm going to go back to Azure Portal and then go to my Storage Sync service. That is where I need to go. So I'm going to go to all services, go to storage, and open my Storage Sync service option here and click on Sync Service 1. And what I'm going to cross check here is the registered service. Okay, so when I click on registered service, as you can see, file server 1 is here. This is my file server on premise. If everything looks good like this and you don't get a red cross over here and it shows it's online, it's a good sign. So when I go here on my on-premise file server and I check the properties of this on-premise file server, it tells me the name of this file server is file server 1. So the file server has been registered successfully on Azure. Okay, the next thing is to add the server as an endpoint. That's my server over here. So I'm going to go to the sync groups, click on sync groups 1, and then I'm going to go here and then add my file server as a server endpoint. Okay, so this is an on-premise server endpoint. When I click add server endpoint, as you can see, my file server 1 is detected. Okay, if you don't do this well, it's not going to detect. Okay, so you make sure you follow the steps and everything is going to be okay. Now, when I select file server 1, it asks me to specify the local path to my file server's network shares. Okay, this is not a network path, it's a local path. So this is what I'm going to do. I go back to my file server on premise and then go to my drive E, which is containing my shares. Okay, so I want to make sure any new share that I create here on my file server is automatically synchronized to the cloud. So I'm going to copy the local path of my network shares and then go back to Azure. You can type if your server is physically isolated from the machine you're using to do this. It's all right, but you have to make sure you don't make any errors typographically, else it's going to fail. So I'm going to click on create over here. Once I provide a local path on the server and I go create, it's going to create a server endpoint. It's accepted. And if everything goes right, the content on my file server over here on premise has to sync automatically to Azure. And any other file server that I do this for that is using the same storage account and the same cloud endpoint, which is my Azure file share 01, will replicate data back and forth with the server endpoints over here. So the file server 1 is being added. Okay, everything looks good here. It's checking the health of it. But while it's checking, let's go here to our storage account and see whether or not the content on our file server is being migrated or synchronized. So when I go to the Azure files here on my Azure portal and open my Azure file shares 01, it tells me the content has pushed successfully, right? So you can see the content I have on my file server, which is network storage 1, network storage 2. When I open this one, there's a couple of files in here. Everything has been synchronized automatically. Right. So from now onwards, if my client on-premise push content to the file server, the Azure File Sync agent on my file server will also automatically push it to Azure. Right. So this is one of the simplest way you can migrate your on-premise file server to Azure. Let's test. Okay, so I'm going to log in here to one of my client machines. And then I think I've mapped a network drive already to my local file server. I think this is it. Yeah. So this one is mapped on network storage 1. So let me just create something new over here. I'm going to call this Ghana is best. Okay, now when I create this file, I'm going to just say, I'm going to call this works. Let me just type in here, it works. Go save. Let's see. This is a regular push, and then when we go here on our local file server, it's showing fine that it's being synchronized on our local file server. And then when we check on Azure, it should also be here. Oh yeah, showing over here. Okay, so this is one of the easiest way you can migrate your on-premise file servers to Azure. Thank you very much for watching my video. If you like this video, subscribe and share with your friends. I'll see you in the next video.